We'll give everyone a few moments to log on here. And looks like we are live. So, welcome to another episode. So, I have a question for you. How many of you attend a church that regularly equips its members with reasons why Christianity is true? And I don't mean the God said it, I believe it, that settles it kind of answers. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, are you equipped to meaningfully engage with the difficult questions and issues we face on a daily basis as they relate to the truthfulness of Christianity? Speaking to leaders in the church, Paul says this in Titus 1, 9 through 14. Holding to the faithful message as taught, so that he will be able both to encourage with sound teaching and to refute those who contradict it. For there are also many rebellious people full of empty talk and deception. It is necessary to silence them, so rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith and may not pay attention to Jewish myths and the commands of men who reject the truth. Pastor, if you're listening today, are you equipping your flock with sound teaching that goes beyond self-help and biblical platitudes? Are you refuting those who contradict the truth? Are you equipping those you shepherd with the ability to proclaim and defend the gospel? This command of the church necessarily involves some level of apologetics. And that's what we're going to talk about today, apologetics in the local church. And we're going to be joined with SES alum, Dr. Ray Ciervo, to discuss why the church needs apologetics and how we can help our churches embrace this important aspect of our ministry. I'm Adam Tucker with Southern Evangelical Seminary, and this is Why Do You Believe? Welcome back to another episode of Why Do You Believe, the podcast of Southern Evangelical Seminary and Bible College. I'm your host for the day, Adam Tucker, and I am glad to have you join us, whether it be via live stream or whether you're listening to this or watching this at a later time. I hope you're enjoying the weekly content. I apologize for missing last week, and I also apologize for my voice today. Springtime has officially caught up with me, and allergies are kicking me pretty hard. So I apologize for the nasalness, but hopefully you can endure. I would encourage you to check out the last few weeks of episodes that we have done. We were joined by Dr. Doug Potter and Dr. Richard Howe on, I think, 3 different episodes discussing various aspects of the nature and attributes of God. So I would encourage you to check those out. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, like our Facebook page, click the bell in YouTube so you know when we're going live, if they even still have a bell. I don't even know if the bell is still there. And as always, you can check out the podcast, the recordings, on the SES mobile app, which you can download from ses.edu. So I would encourage you to do that. So if you follow the show, you know that we like to start out with a fallacy of the week. Again, a fallacy just being a bad way of thinking. And I'll say off the bat, I honestly don't know if this week's is technically considered a fallacy, but regardless, it is a bad way to think and a bad way to communicate with others. So today's fallacy, or maybe not fallacy, depending on how you define them exactly, is gaslighting. And this is a term I honestly was unfamiliar with until the last year or so with all the critical race theory conversations and things going on. So maybe you already know what this is. If not, gaslighting is a psychological manipulation technique that causes a person or group to question their own memory, their own perception, their own judgment, their own feelings. So basically, you're causing someone to question everything they are thinking and feeling. Now, obviously, when we challenge people with different ideas, we're encouraging them to question things and to make sure they're thinking rightly. This is not just that. This is not just having conversations with folks. It's been said that someone summed up gaslighting best by saying, "Don't pee on my shoe and tell me it's raining outside." So apologize if you think that's a little crass, but I think it's a pretty good explanation of what's going on here. So I think right now, most often we see this happening within the woke movement, and specifically by those who buy into this movement, and they cause others to start thinking that the racists or bigots or whatever, if they don't agree with all of the wokeness nonsense that is being portrayed. So someone may have never thought of themselves as racist in the least. Their best friend may be someone of a different ethnicity for all that matters. But gaslighting will cause them to question everything. And you've seen on the news, some people almost ending up in the fetal position, apologizing for things that they've never even done in the first place. And this is one reason why racism is discovered in literally everything, if you're part of the critical race theory mindset, and accusations of microaggressions are hurled around for just the least thing someone may innocently say, or ideological disagreements are characterized as violence, as literal violence towards someone. And of course that causes certain people to start thinking, very negatively of themselves just for asking a question, for example. So be on the lookout for gaslighting. Don't succumb to it, and certainly don't do that to other people. We want to be better thinkers and better communicators than that. So let's bring in our guest for today. Let me switch shots here. Dr. Ray Ciervo. Thank you so much for joining us, Ray. Appreciate you being on.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's a real privilege to do this. So really excited about it.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Ray is a longtime friend, a longtime SES guy. Graduated with his Doctor of Ministry from SES, was it 3-4 years ago? Something like that?
Yeah, it was 2015 when I finished.
6 years ago, yeah.
And I think I walked on in 2016 because I finished right at the end of 2015.
Excellent. So time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, and I did my MA there. Started in 2000 and really plowed through it, and I graduated there then at 2002. So I have both my graduate degrees from SES.
Nice. So you really are a long-time SES guy.
Yeah, somebody told me that I came from the classic period, and I kind of thought, do you mean when we met in trailers? Is that what? and McKee Road?
That's right.
Sunday school? Yeah.
Yep.
Does that what classic means?
Yeah, probably so. So Ray is a great apologist. He's an author and a regular speaker on issues dealing with various aspects of apologetics, and he's also served in the local church in this capacity for a number of years. So I can't think of too many people better to talk about this subject than you, sir. So before we do that, though, we like to have a little bit of fun, and being a fellow Aquinas guy, you appreciate his on the contrary sections of many of his works, where he starts to make the turn and talk about his position. So we like to have a segment we call on the contrary, just to get to know our guests a little bit more.
Okay.
I actually didn't give Ray a heads up about this, but I'm going to ask you a series of nonsensical false dilemmas, either or kind of questions, just so we can learn a little bit about you. I got 60 seconds on the clock, so are you good with that?
Yep, I'm good.
All right, here we go. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
All right, good man. Early riser or night owl?
Early riser.
Mm, not surprised. Not surprised.
Hmm.
Probably know the answer. Well, actually, I don't know the answer to this. Printed books or ebooks?
Printed books. Have
Ah,
to date myself there.
okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing
Nothing wrong
like the
with
feel of a good book. Yeah.
that. Let's see. Thin crust or thick crust pizza?
Thin crust. I'm a New Yorker.
Ah, there
Yeah.
you go. There you go. That's right. Pepsi or Coke then?
Pepsi.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. The most important one: toilet paper, over or under?
Mm. Over.
Over. Yes. See, I knew I liked you, Ray. I knew it.
somebody actually somebody actually brought in, and they were preaching and actually brought in something from some, I don't know where it came from, showing that when the toilet roll was first put on the stand or whatever it was over, and he just wanted to settle it with the church.
That's right. That's right.
So
It's like going back to the church fathers. This is what they
there you
did.
go.
All right. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for having a little bit of fun with us, and let's jump in to the topic at hand. So, like I said a while ago, Ray's been serving in the local church, in his local church, and in many other churches for a number of years. So, I'm curious, Ray, just in your experience, what have you seen in terms of local churches taking seriously Paul's admonition from Titus that I read at the beginning of the show? Are they equipping believers by and large to stand firm in truth and combat error?
Well, let me just give you some context. I pastored for years before I started to even get into apologetics. So I was first made aware, if I could say that, of apologetics probably in the late 80s, early 90s. And one of the things that led me into apologetics was we had some young people return from college on their first or second break and just started firing questions at me. And I had no idea what they were talking about. And they would mention Friedrich Nietzsche. They had questions about evolution, and I really didn't know how to respond in an intelligent way. And I saw that these young people had really been affected by this, and it really concerned their faith. So I went on a mission just to find out what this was. And this basically is to tell you how I found SES too. Was I just started buying books. People would give me books when they heard I was interested in it, and there wasn't a whole lot of books out there at the time. And someone handed me at one point Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig, which made me think I'll never learn this subject. But I started to do a lot of reading, and I realized nobody was doing anything like this in any of my friends or fellowship or relationships that were in pastoral work. And a lot of people told me that they just didn't have time for it. And if I could say, the Lord led me to see the impact that the culture was having on our young people. And I didn't know anything about the number of young people that were dropping out of church or Christianity because of it. But I just felt like I needed to pursue this. And so by the mid to late 90s, I was really on a tear to read everything I could get my hands on. Of course, Josh McDowell's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, hadn't been reprinted yet, hadn't been, done over with his son, Sean. But I had the 2-volume set, and that was helping me with some. And the one name that kept coming up all along was Norman Geisler. Besides Ravi Zacharias, I think Norman Geisler was the number one name that was coming up. And so I, thought I'm going to pursue this. And at the time, we found that there was a certificate course. I think it's still offered by SES. And I thought, I'm going to try to get involved in this. and filled out an application, heard from Dr. Geisler. He actually called me, which I was kind of shocked by, and invited my wife and I to come down and spend a couple of days with he and Barbara and see the seminary, which again was in the offices and the library were in trailers, and they were meeting in the McKee Road Baptist Church Sunday School wing. And so we came in down and did that. Well, that's how I got started. And a few months later, my wife and I moved from Hamilton, New Jersey, down to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I attended SES. And when I left New Jersey at the time, people didn't know what I was doing. They honestly thought I was just going off on some kind of whimsical thing, whereas, the burden of defending the gospel was really what turned out to be the driving force behind me. I wanted to help young people originally, but then I realized parents needed this stuff to teach their children. And as a pastor, I often introduce myself that way, that I got into apologetics not through philosophy. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, I was trying to avoid anything that had to do with philosophical thought, just because I thought I'll never get this, and turned out very differently. But my fellowship, or friends that I was in fellowship with that were pastoring churches, really just would tell me that they didn't have time to get into this, and this was something that was really not necessary. I won't say it was unnecessary, that they were saying it was unnecessary, but that it wasn't necessary for them to do it, that they could still handle this with just preaching the Bible, which some of them, and I have to say a good many of them, really knew how to preach the Bible, but didn't know how to answer the questions, didn't know how to deal with postmodernism, which was really, really on the rise there, and as well as something, I'm not sure how strong it is today, I don't hear very much about it, but open theism was on the rise, that God doesn't know the future of free will agents, and that the future is open to our decisions, and didn't know how to defend those things, didn't know why they should defend those things. So, long answer to say that the majority of churches that I come in contact with do not demonstrate that they are teaching their church how to defend the historic Christian faith. They're not really dealing with answers. I think today, because of critical theory, not just critical race theory, but you put whatever modifier you want between those two words. And because of critical theory, I find a lot more people wanting to know more about, how do you answer this person, or how do you answer this particular subject? And I think, and I think this well, that the answers really are philosophical. They're not theological, and they're not sociological. They really are philosophical, and you have to draw them into a philosophical discussion. And I think a lot more parents are coming to me now saying, how do I talk to my kid about this?
Yeah.
Or my kids about this, because they're getting fed this in school. You hear it more often than not now. They're getting younger and younger. They're trying to indoctrinate children who are, in elementary school, and first, second, third graders having to learn this stuff. So, the long answer is no, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And I see a lot of Christian activists who are basically railing against this, but don't know really the underpinnings of it. And I'd have to say, without SES, I wouldn't know the philosophical underpinnings of it either.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think you bring up two important points. That, first of all, I do want to characterize this conversation as uh, not one meant to just beat up on pastors or local churches.
Right.
The whole point of this conversation is to bring this issue to light and to be edifying in that, because many churches have just, through no fault of any one person, have
Yeah.
been set up in such a way that the pastor has a completely impossible job description,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
can't possibly do everything that people expect him to do. Uh, and,
Exactly.
and we certainly understand that, which is something I think we'll get into today. But the other thing is, you said without necessarily saying it explicitly, when we talk about apologetics in the church, I want to be clear that we're not talking about one thing. If I just teach my church this thing, then I'm doing
Hmm.
apologetics in the church. It's constantly changing, not the
Yeah.
truth, but the issues that have to be addressed are
Right.
constantly changing. And again, it's impossible for one person to keep up with all of these things, which hopefully I'm sure we'll get in at the end as to one of the solutions to this problem. But we don't want to get there quite yet. So,
Yeah.
um, why do you think? Because this has been going on for years. The kind of anti-intellectualism shift in the church, uh, either completely anti-intellectualism or this more, like you mentioned a while ago, this presuppositional kind of take of uh, these groups that just quote the Bible constantly, and that's supposed to somehow influence an unbelieving world that doesn't
Right.
even believe God exists, half the time. Why do you think we've seen the church get to the point that it is, as far as it not taking seriously the admonitions of Scripture?
Yeah. From my experience and having worked with pastors and worked with churches, I think the biggest thing of it was, postmodern seemed to be far away from the church. There wasn't anything going on with the progressive movement in Christianity. And postmodernism and even evolution, the scientific side of life just seemed to be far away. It didn't seem to be as close. And if you go for, and I think for the longest time, Young Earth was probably had more in print and more books, and there were certain groups that they could go to for answers. And homeschooling was on the rise, so people were not that affected with the things in the world. But now, um, the media puts it in everybody's living room. And the media has picked up. Matter of fact, I just wrote something on one of my social media websites, and I tried not to be snarky about it. But I said, not for nothing, but apologists have been talking about this for more than 20 years, how the academy has been taken over by people who are pushing critical theory and basically been teaching critical theory. You know, I see critical theory as the outworking or the stepchild of postmodernism. It was just the next logical thing that would happen if they took it to the next level. And that's basically what's happened. And now that it's in their living room, all of a sudden it's become more popular. And people want, for you'll understand this, they want a pat answer. They want something that's just going to dissolve it, just one statement that's going to deal with it. And it requires a lot more thinking and critical thinking and bringing things like truth into the discussion because of the absolute and objective nature of truth is what I mean by that. And then having to teach that all over again. Now I have to say that the church I've been with was a church I started quite a long time ago, and I'm there as the quote unquote teaching pastor. I got enough degrees that they call me the teaching pastor. And I've done seminars and conferences there since 2009 or 8. Maybe it was 2009 that we had Dr. Geisler here as our first guest speaker. And he gave me the insight. I don't know if this is saying this too early in our discussion, but he told me to just do a free seminar several times a year for the church. Just do 9 to 12 on a Saturday morning, 3 or 4 times a year, just to keep it in front of people's faces. And that started to draw other people. And a couple of pastors attend that regularly. As a matter of fact, a couple of them have become good friends of mine because they attend. And it still is difficult for them to get the rank and file to sign on to it, which is really interesting to me that they won't invest the time into that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But to go back to your question, I think the media has really put this in front of everybody's face. And the things that are going on in selection of Supreme Court justices or whatever, they're seeing a whole lot of things that they can't make sense of. And so I think apologetics, I won't say it's the flavor of the month, but it's become a lot more central or closer to the center of people's thoughts, and because I get emails, and honestly, I get mostly moms, housewives, emailing me or even calling me at times to ask me about how do they deal with their college-age son or daughter, or their high school son or daughter who's doing this or reading this, and what's the answer for this kind of thing. So, yeah.
I was talking with one of our mutual friends who's also an SES grad just the other day, and they were doing a seminar for moms of children who identified as transgender. And so she was doing, this very philosophical and biblical, 'cause the two obviously aren't contrary, seminar on gender roles, gender distinctions, natural law, all these sorts of things. And a pastor's wife from the area had attended because he kind of wanted to get some recon on what this was all about. And she was blown away. Why have we never heard any of this? Why have we never been taught any of this? Just a concrete example of what you're saying. So along those lines, then, the church has a huge responsibility. Pastors have huge responsibilities. Obviously, it can't and should not replace the family and what the family's teaching and those sorts of things. But what role do you think apologetics specifically should play in a local body of believers?
Yeah, well, I'm fairly biased on this. I think that it should be part of the preaching, and even, maybe one of the lenses that the pastor or whoever is the main preacher. I know some churches have preaching teams, and it should be a regular part of the diet of the pulpit or even classes. Now, I've done everything from classes on hermeneutics and different aspects, whether it's the historical side of apologetics or the scientific side or the philosophical side. So I think we've got to revamp the way that we look at educating the church and challenge the church. And, I think that we ought to be able to teach the church to defend its faith no matter what area that they're going into, and maybe hook a couple of them to really start to dig into it. Whether they be a science teacher or a history teacher. I find that those are some of the easy ones to influence in this. But even from the pulpit, we do Christmas and Easter regularly, and they're the two most attended church services in the year, and they ought to be done from an apologetic standpoint. I think they ought to be not just, you know, dressing up Christmas, which is, one of my pet peeves, that we've stolen something of God's gift to us by Santa Claus, Christmas trees, materialism, and all those things, which is great. You want to celebrate the birth of Christ, no question about it. But I think we've got to work into that the apologetic value of that,
Mm-hmm.
that this is God's plan for humanity, and children ought to know what it meant for God to become, the Word becoming flesh, and that sort of thing. The
Mm-hmm.
resurrection's a whole lot easier to get at, because there's so much evidence for
Right.
the death and resurrection of Christ. And yeah, so the church here, because I had such a I basically planted the church, it's quite a while ago. So I have a lot of people here who still look to me for they would call me their spiritual father, or someone who was their first pastor. So I made it a mark on their life.
Mm-hmm.
So they would look to me for that, and they've been the ones that have been really part of my team here when we put on conferences and stuff like that. And I'm trying to continue to help them to spread it with their relationships, so that it becomes, Nell Brace said something once. I had Simon and Nell Brace to a couple of the conferences, and Nell Brace said she really longed for the day where we wouldn't have to have conferences to teach
Mm.
apologetics, because people would just know it like they know the books of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
or they know the story of redemption. And, that really struck me. I thought, yeah,
Yep.
right now we're trying, for the longest time, we've been trying to sell it, if I could say that,
Mm-hmm.
as something that's really important. But I think it needs to become part of our thinking. And I, I, I like to teach people how to think critically,
Yep.
how to use logic in a winsome way, not
Sure.
so much as, the logician or the mathematician that kind of like bores everybody to death. But like what you said before, about presenting the fallacies, um, is probably the easiest way to teach people that
Mm-hmm.
they're not thinking correctly,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and
Yeah. This is
yeah.
definitely one of my soapboxes. Because
Mm.
we're not saying, again, just like we were saying with the pastor. We're not trying to beat up on pastors. We're also not saying apologetics is the only thing that a church should be doing. That is certainly
Right.
not the case.
Yeah.
But I get so frustrated seeing it as an afterthought so much of the time. Or, oh yeah, you can do that little class. Uh, but we constantly have classes on parenting, which is important. We constantly have
Hmm.
classes on managing your finances, which is important. Constantly have concerts and groups coming in for entertainment. I'm sorry,
Hmm.
evangelism and ministry, aka Christian entertainment, and nothing wrong with any of those things. But is
Yeah.
Christianity true? And can you communicate
Right.
that to somebody? Can you communicate that to your kid?
Yeah.
And that's an afterthought, and
Hmm.
it is just maddening. And
Yeah.
largely, I think it's probably Frank Turek who says so often that the church is to be held responsible largely responsible for the reason the culture is in the state that it's in right now,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we haven't done the job that we should be doing
Yeah.
in this regard.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion, for whatever that's
Yeah.
worth.
No, I agree. I used to say, when I pastored, I used to say the world is doing a better job of evangelizing us than we are doing to evangelize the
Yeah.
world.
Mm-hmm.
they're making us more worldly than we are really influencing them with the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's now, like I said, now it's so much in your face that it's hard to
Yeah.
deny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It
you
doesn't
meet
matter until
everybody
it
who
affects
doesn't.
you personally, right?
Exactly. And you meet everybody who just doesn't want to talk about it because it's we know we're going to get angry. And I said, well, no, not going to get angry, we're just going to talk about it. Let's just have a discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything from Christians who don't believe that we should be using our intellect, that we should just be led by the Spirit, whatever that means, and not really learn how to think about this and learn how to discern right from wrong, good from
Mm-hmm.
evil. What's the chief end? What are we looking to do here, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I understand pastors have so many things coming across their their desk and put on their plate that they're trying to find out, what am I supposed to do? And part of the problem is, Adam, from my perspective, is, and I'm sure there might be some other ways to describe it. Churches are either in survival mode or mission mode.
Mm.
And give me their bulletin, and I'll probably tell you which one it is, or listen to a sermon or two, and I could probably tell you which one it's in. They're either trying to just survive or they're on a mission. Now, just being on a mission isn't good enough. What mission are they on?
Mm-hmm.
Are they really trying to reach the lost by interacting or engaging the lost, or are they just trying to have the biggest church in town?
Right.
So, and helping pastors see those things. And, Jesus left the world with 11 living disciples, and was happy enough to do that. And I think is because of his relationship with them rather than just trying to get the biggest crowd he could. Um, and I don't know if that's just descriptive or prescriptive. I tend to think there's a
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So we've, I think, done a good enough job of laying out the problem and why this is important for churches to embrace and take up the mantle for. But like we've said over and over now, pastors can't do everything. Now, we have a number of pastors who are graduates of SES or current students or whatever, and they get it, they enjoy it. It is part of their DNA of the church, of their sermon prep and delivery, and so they just incorporate it kind of as they go, kind of thing like you were mentioning earlier. And I think you probably do a whole lot of that yourself. But for those pastors who, to no fault of their own, they weren't trained in this. They have no official training. Maybe they don't have time to get any more training. Although, if you're interested in getting more training, visit ses.edu to learn more about becoming a student. How can church members come alongside of their pastors and get this kind of apologetics training started in their church? What are some practical things we can take away to help get this momentum going?
Yeah, that's great. I actually taught on this at at one of the Ratio Christi's conferences or symposiums, I guess they called it, when they were meeting there in Charlotte. And they asked me to teach on, how do you bring apologetics into the church when you're not the pastor? And I told them the first thing to do is you don't want to come along and say, I'm going to straighten you out. Not that you would use those words, but give that impression to the pastor, like I've got the answer that's going to really solve the problems of the church. You really have to come with a spirit of humility and first just find out how you can serve the pastor, because he's really the door to that congregation. In most churches, I don't know if the deacon board's in charge or the pastor's in charge of who gets in to teach or to help. But the first thing you want to do is have a real spirit of humility and see that you've got to become a servant to him and his ministry and make him a success. That's what your mentality has to be. Anything else, you might get a pastor who's a little bit of a gambler, and he'll say, yeah, well, we'll give it a try. But if you want to have a long-standing relationship with that church and really bring something like apologetics, which we haven't said it yet today, it's heavy lifting. This is the heavyweight stuff in the gym. This is not just some stretching exercise or something that we do easily, but it's going to be hard work. And that's maybe why a lot of pastors retreat from it or back off of it, because they know it's going to be a lot of work. So you want to come and maybe with 2 or 3 people really have a heart to come alongside this person and say, what can I do to help you? And win their trust and win their confidence, excuse me, to help them do what they believe God has called them to do. Because I'd say the large majority of pastors want to serve the Lord. They want to fulfill something where they bless God. They feel like they have something from God, and they want to do God's will. And so when you come alongside, which very few people do, to pastors and just say, I'm here to help, that's gonna really open the door for them. And maybe you have a church where you can go and say, I have a subject that I'd like to teach for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Pardon me. You don't want to say, I have a year's worth of material, because they don't want to. They'll never enlist you to do something like that. Not regularly, anyway. So you want to keep it something short, and if I could say this, whet their appetite with something. One of our problems with apologetics is that it's so laden with information, and we feel like we have to get as much information out there that we can, and it overloads people, and they'll say, I'll never do that. One of the things I learned with going to churches was that I wanted to give them something that they could easily grasp. And philosophy is not one of those subjects, nor is studying DNA. It might pique their interest, the DNA might do it. But if you start talking about things that are biblical, like the resurrection, that gets people interested. That's been my experience. And so I start with the resurrection. I start with presenting evidence for the resurrection, because most Christians don't know that there is even evidence for the resurrection, that you can make a case that Jesus rising from the dead is more probable than the disciples stealing his body, that his body being eaten by dogs, that someone else being put in his place, that there is more evidence for that. When people hear that, that gets them interested. And I find that that's really where you start to gather the people who are going to be interested in this. And so I even wrote my dissertation for my doctorate of ministry on this, a new way to approach classical apologetics. I still believe that classical apologetics is the best way of learning what the arguments are. And you find the nature of truth in that, the existence of God, miracles, and so on. But when you go to the local church, you want to get something that's going to get their mind and heart. And I follow that up with examples of truth, because to me, truth is prior to all the other information. If people don't believe that truth is objective and absolute, then we're really not just we're not teaching, we're just sharing an opinion. And we've got to be able to say this corresponds to what's real. And we can know what's real and go through those steps at the same time when we're doing that. And to me, that's been the most successful thing I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I can be humorous when I do it. You present things that are just so blatant that when people realize it, they'll realize, yeah, true, absolute objective truth does exist. And once I get that hook in, I think I'm pretty much on my way to things now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the pastor is the door, and you've always got to see that if he's your enemy, you're never going to get access in that church. If you try time and time again and you can't get in, then you got to make decisions. What do you think is more important to me? It's the gospel. If we lose the gospel, we really don't have a purpose. I mean, I love Thomas. C.S. Lewis said for every new book you read, you should read an old one. So my old book that I'm usually reading is something that Aquinas wrote. There's just a whole lot there to read,
Yeah.
And so, but I don't think I'm called to defend Thomas Aquinas. I think his methodology in philosophical, pursuit or truth, and his theology, I think I find very, very much part of my thinking. But I'm really called to defend the gospel of Jesus Christ, that Jesus is alive from the dead. And I want to do that with the best tools that I can. And so I don't want to get caught up in things. I agree with Frank Turek about being involved in politics. But I need to be careful there, because I can really get focused in on something. And I always come back to my heart, my job, my ministry is to defend the historical Christian belief, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what we want to focus on, and help some other people realize, oh yeah, that's what it is. It's not to have the hippest church in town, the biggest church in town. Those things don't save people.
Yeah.
So
humility,
that's where I go with that. Yeah.
Humility, an attitude of how can I help you, pastor, fulfill the mission of this church, and go from there.
Yeah.
And start small. I think that was the other one. Yeah, that's great advice, and I've seen some success with that myself through the years. It's often a long process to get some of these things happening, but it is worth it. So, last question for this segment, and we're coming up towards the end here. But what would you say are the most important 3 or 4 issues right now that you think churches should be equipping their members to engage?
Oh boy. I think one of them is probably more general than the others, but I think that getting the church to share their faith is one of the most important things, and they won't do that without confidence. And so, while I'm not an evangelist, I don't see myself as an evangelist. I do evangelize, but I'm not an evangelist. But I think that's one of the most important things that the church has to do, is to focus outwardly and to see, how do they engage the culture? How can they engage the culture? What are the best ways to engage the culture? And we live in a multi-ethnic area of New Jersey. We have a lot of South Americans from Brazil and some other Latino countries, a lot of other ethnic groups, some Portuguese, but a lot from Mexico and Guatemala and everything like that. Besides our, stock Americans, that are part of here. But we're in the Northeast, which is probably more akin to Europe than it is to the rest of the U.S. We have a lot more skepticism and atheism here, but So to me, the task here, getting people to go out and evangelize, is one of the most important things that they need to know. Um, I know this sounds a little bit over the top, but I think the history of thought is something that the church needs to get involved in. Why? I've always been interested in this, even before I knew that it was part of philosophy. But how did we get here? How did we get to this place in our culture today where, my wife and I like to watch old sitcoms or things like Gunsmoke, we find them on TV, and we compare them to some of the say the crime dramas that are on TV today, or not very many westerns that are on TV anymore, but some of the sitcoms that are on there today. And the question always comes up, how did we get here? What were the changes that happened? Pardon me, got something stuck in my throat. But you have to think of the way life changed is because of the worldview changing, which is based on some presuppositions about reality. I think that's something that the church needs to learn, and how the gospel, I'm going to choke here, stayed the same through the whole thing. The application may have changed some, but the gospel hasn't changed. And I don't know if God's going to raise up another Billy Graham. I'm not even sure if there's one on the horizon, or if the church has to take up the mantle and start sharing the gospel. So I think that's really important. And if I were going to dig into the philosophical side right now, besides learning, say, the three most probably talked about things in apologetics would be, God's existence. When I say that, which God are we talking about? And the nature of truth, which is something that, again, I mentioned earlier, is foundational to everything else. If we don't value the truth and we don't have it, really nothing really works. And that pretty much is tied to the history of thought. It's because of how we've dealt with truth and dealt with God, or which God are we talking about? And if we wanted something practical, and we want to deal with critical theory, then I would suggest that you get some books that deal with critical theory, or yeah, that would probably be the best thing. Again, that would be my thing. Adam, you would know this, that research is just so much a part of our learning at SCS, makes our libraries grow bigger than they probably should. But we research things to find out, not just to get someone echo what we already believe, but to hear the other side of it, so that we can understand where they're coming from. And Dr. Geisel was really emphatic about that in his courses whenever he taught something on philosophy, was we had to understand the opposition, and be able to defend the opposition's position because we understood it so well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been an inestimable, valuable thing. You can't put a value on learning how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say those things, truth. I would say which God are we talking about? Have a really clear theological picture of a biblical God, a theistic God, a Christian theistic God. And if we wanted the history of thought I mentioned too, that's kind of my pet thing. That I do that almost everywhere, understanding how and why we think, like the fact-value dichotomy, how that was adapted. David Hume put that into existence, and how we just, it obliterates truth no matter which way you go with it.
Yeah.
If you go to the scientific side, the fact side of it, it's put in a box. And if you go to the value side of it, you end up with critical theory. It's just an amazing thing. But those things, I think, and the easier ones are to talk about truth. You can illustrate truth in any sermon, as well as you can talk about God. It's when you get into these other issues, like the history of thought or especially critical theory, that becomes the most difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Dr. Geisler that said Immanuel Kant has influenced the church more than Jesus Christ has, and most people don't even know his name. So, yeah, I mean that's a very important topic to deal with for sure. I mean, we are in a spiritual war, and according to 2 Corinthians 10, as you know, that is a war of ideas. And so if you don't know the history of ideas and how these things interact, then you're not going to be a very good soldier in this war. So
That's right.
I think that is very important. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to jump in. This has been super helpful, I think, and hopefully very practical for our listeners and viewers. But again, in honor of Aquinas, I want to jump into our just short answer question and answer section called I Answer That. So again, we got about 5 minutes left, but just a few questions someone may be asking kind of as follow-up sorts of things. And the first one really is not a particular question, but I'm curious in your experience with churches, and you've alluded to this earlier, what are some of the common objections that you've heard about the need for apologetics in the church?
Probably one of the ones that I don't appreciate at most is that all you need is the Word of God. The Word of God is like a lion. All you got to do is let it out of the cage and it'll do its work. That's probably the number one thing. And that rational thought gets in the way of faith. That if you think too much about something, you won't have faith for it. And, my experience is just the opposite is true. My faith has done nothing but grow. You wrestle with things. That's part of it, is you wrestle with ideas. But I find that my faith grows, my confidence grows, my trust grows in God and in that.
Complete misunderstanding of faith, right?
Sorry?
It's just a complete misunderstanding of what biblical faith is in that sense.
It is. It doesn't understand the relationship between faith and reason.
Yeah.
And, and you hear that from people who are of a different ilk concerning apologetics. Your presuppositional side will say that you're starting with man, and you're not, or you're starting with reason and not starting with faith. You're starting with man's word, not God's word. And Richard Howe has been really helpful in that area.
Yeah,
he's yeah.
Yep. And of course, it's not that difficult to understand that if something is not based in reason, then it is unreasonable. And even if it's beyond our ability to reason to, like the things God reveals to us in His Word, it doesn't mean it's unreasonable or irrational. Those things would be false, and that would be a problem.
Yeah.
So I can hear someone saying, you've said that apologetics is heavy lifting, it's difficult. So how much training does someone need to get started in helping their church down this pathway?
Yeah, I think there's when I was trying to find resources for this, there wasn't hardly anything written. Dr. Geisler's book, Christian Apologetics, was, put your chest waders on if you want to get through that thing as your first book. You're gonna, like, you're walking through mud trying to get through it. But he wasn't writing it for newbies. I think that there are some good books out there that help you. I wrote a book called Apologetics for the Rest of Us, and I really wrote it as a brochure. I wasn't trying to write a treatise on apologetics. I was just
Hmm.
trying to write as this is what you can expect when you get into apologetics. This is what I got into when I got into it. But there's some good books out there that help you. So you can pick some of J. Warner Wallace's books, even Natasha Crane, her book for parents of children, her
Hmm.
first book, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side, is a great introductory book to apologetics. Even if you don't have little children, even if you don't have any children, it's a good resource to just get into apologetics. Um, so you ease your way in, and then I tell people find your lane. What
Hmm.
what are the things that you really want to get into? Have a broad understanding of it, and then find your lane. Like I really like the historical side of it.
Hmm.
Um, but I dabble in all of it, I mean, or more than dabble, I get involved in all of it.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think the historical side of the resurrection to me is where I meet the church. So I
Mm,
really want to have that
sure.
one down. But yeah, if you get involved in it, you'll end up with more than 2 or 3 books on the subject. Um,
And the cool thing is, like you say, there wasn't a lot when you got started, but now there is so much. And
oh
video-driven curriculum you can find from Frank Turek, and Richard Howe has done a great one with American Family Association on Intro to God's Revelation, which is
yeah,
fantastic. And so even if you don't know anything personally, you can learn with the class
yeah,
now. And I will offer a word of caution. It's like anything else. There are many good resources, and there are also many bad resources.
right, yeah.
And we're happy to help you discern between those if you want to contact us at ses.edu, or any way we can be of service with that. And of course, being a seminary, we would encourage people, if you're interested in this, to continue on in your learning,
Yeah,
whether that's auditing classes, or perhaps working towards a certificate or even a degree, if that's something you
yeah.
see God leading you to.
And let me make a plug for that, Adam. The master's degree that I did at SES in apologetics is the backbone of everything else I do.
Hmm.
I mean, I earned a doctor of ministry, which was further learning, no question about it. But if you could audit classes at SES, they're world class professors. Um, the level of knowledge is just, I think it's unmatched everywhere else. And I've met people and I don't want to again bash any of the other
Oh, sure,
seminaries that are
sure.
teaching apologetics. I'm glad for every one of them that's offering a degree in apologetics. But like Adam, like you said, you could just audit classes um, where you don't have to produce the work and so on. But SES has a great understanding of the important things that you need to learn about apologetics or philosophy of defending your faith. And I treasure the only thing I did wrong when I went to SES was I crammed it into 2 years.
Mm. Oh, wow.
And it took me probably another 3 years to really learn,
To
to
digest everything.
realize what I learned. I did well, but it was cramming. It
Hmm.
was literally burnt. I didn't burn out, but I was close. Yeah.
Well,
There's
Ray,
so
this is
much to learn.
I didn't pay you to say that, so I appreciate the plug. But where can people go to learn more about your work and what you're doing?
My website is just rayciervo.com. I have a YouTube channel under Ray Ciervo Ministries where I'm trying to put up at least one a week, short videos on different things. Um, I'm working on a series that I've taught a number of times called Turning Skeptics into Seekers, and kind of a practical thing on sharing your faith. But those two places, I'm on Instagram as well, Facebook, have a ministry page there, Ray Ciervo Ministries. I switched my name from Notepad Answers to Ray Ciervo Ministries because there were too many different moving parts. So I wanted to collect everything back under one. And that's what I'm incorporated under, Ray Ciervo Ministries. So we went back that direction.
Awesome.
But
And for our podcast listeners, Ciervo is Ciervo. So Ray Ciervo Ministries.
that's right. I
Well,
appreciate
Ray,
that.
it has been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to be with us, and keep up the good work, man.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a blessing. Really enjoyed this, Adam.
All right. Well, we will talk again soon, I hope.
Yes.
Take care.
Amen. You too.
Well, again, that was Dr. Ray Ciervo with Ray Ciervo Ministries, and I hope you enjoyed that. And like we mentioned, if you're interested in learning more about equipping yourself, regardless of what level that may look like for you, I would encourage you to visit degrees.ses.edu/podcast. Degrees with an s.ses.edu/podcast. You can download a free ebook, learn a little bit more about what SES has to offer, what makes us unique, specifically our integrated approach to theology, philosophy, and apologetics that I think is quite unique amongst evangelical institutions. So I hope you will check that out. Again, degrees.ses.edu/podcast. And as always, this kind of content, these things that we're doing, having a school in general does not happen without your support. So whether you can support us financially, prayerfully, whatever that may look like for you, I would encourage you to visit ses.edu and learn more about the various ways that you can partner with us. And we would say thank you in advance for that. And as always, we call this show Why Do You Believe? And the only reason to believe anything is because it's true. So go share truth with someone today.
Providing an integrated approach to theology, philosophy, and apologetics that will equip you to proclaim the gospel, engage the culture, and defend the truth. That's SES.